the Deputy Division Director for Solid Waste Materials Management at MassDEP. In this position, he oversees MassDEP's development and implementation of Solid Waste Master Plan, including MassDEP's regulatory, permitting, compliance, and grant assistance programs to manage solid waste and advance waste reduction, recycling, and composting in Massachusetts. He has been with MassDEP since 1998, and he holds a bachelor's degree in human ecology from Connecticut College and a master's in city planning, focusing on environmental policy and planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. John.
Thanks. There's a lot of cables down here. All right. Well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning. We're in kind of just-in-time presentation mode these days, so I put this together yesterday, so I didn't look at it that carefully, so I'm glad to see I got the right date and all those kinds of things. I was just kind of nervous about that when I was looking up the slides, so hopefully that's a sign of good things to come. So I wanted to just kind of set the context for you a little bit today, talk about our big picture approach to reducing food waste in Massachusetts on the statewide level. And I'll run through, as you can see, I'll talk about some of our goals, our management capacity. I'll talk a lot about the commercial food waste ban and kind of what that means and how that's being implemented, and talk about the supporting programs. And then Heather, who will be speaking after me, will be speaking about one of our core programs, Recycling Works in Massachusetts, which Heather runs a lot of the work around food waste for CET, which is the organization that runs the Recycling Works program. So she'll fill you in more about that. So I'll only touch on Recycling Works briefly, and Heather will go into more depth about that program. So food waste, if you don't know this, food waste is the largest category of waste in our municipal solid waste streams. So that's our regular trash from households and businesses. That's on a tonnage basis. And this is actually based on Massachusetts-specific waste characterization data. So we're pretty confident that this is an accurate reflection of what's in our waste. So it's a little over 1/5 of our trash, of our regular household and business trash, is food waste, about 21%. So that comes out to a little bit over 900,000 tons a year going into the trash, so solid waste disposal. So in our 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan, when that plan was written, we had a baseline goal of, or baseline status, we were diverting about 280,000 tons of food waste on an annual basis. That was as of 2018. And we set a goal in the master plan to increase that on an annual basis by 500,000 tons per year by 2030. So by 2030, we would, if successful, we would be diverting 780,000 tons of food waste per year from the trash on an annual basis. And that's all forms of diversion: reducing food waste to begin with, food donation and rescue, composting, animal feed, anaerobic digestion, all taken together. We've estimated in our work around developing our food waste ban, I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute, but we've estimated that kind of suite of programs will get us about 400,000 tons of that 780,000 tons alone. So there's more we have to do to capture food waste from smaller sources that are not yet subject to the ban. Our current management capacity for food waste, and this is somewhat elastic, but it's in the neighborhood of 500,000 tons a year. So we have more capacity than we need at the moment, but not enough to meet our ultimate 2030 goals. So eventually we're going to need more capacity to manage food scraps in the state. And probably more distributed capacity. I'll talk more about that too. So this gives you a snapshot of when we started really measuring food waste diversion in a focused way since 2016. This reporting is not perfect. A lot of this for compost sites is based on volume to weight estimates, and the animal feed is likely underrepresented here. We have a hard time getting reporting from farms that take food material for animal feed. So this is our best estimate, and we're pretty confident it's underreported. But you can see, big picture, what's happening is we have seen a lot of growth in anaerobic digestion of food waste. This is mainly AD facilities at dairy farms in Massachusetts that co-digest food scraps with dairy manure, which is a really, really good, effective approach. It's worked very well. We have a little bit of room to grow that within the existing capacity. But that's where we've seen the most growth so far. Interestingly, compost tonnage has actually declined a little bit over this period. We've seen relatively static animal feed and food donation numbers. We'd love to grow the food donation and rescue in particular. We have seen a growth in rescue of fresh and perishable foods. We have a lot of great organizations working on that, and we've seen some growth there, but we'd like to grow just our overall food rescue and donation. And the other are two facilities that process food materials, and I believe they primarily discharge to sewer. So it's not going into the solid waste stream, so it's a diversion category, but it's another form of waste management, ultimately. This gives you an idea of how our food waste diversion with businesses has grown since 2014 when we implemented our initial ban. So you can see, with the exception of COVID, when, like everything else in the world, commercial food waste diversion got turned upside down during COVID. I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't drop even more than that with all of the shifts in commercial and institutional activity during 2020. But other than that, we've seen some really steady progress with the number of businesses separating food waste from diversion. So this reflects the number of businesses that have service with a hauler for separate food waste collection. So when we think about our strategy, we think from MassDEP's perspective, we think about three categories of food waste sources. One is what we call the large generators, and these are the ones that got addressed to start with in 2014 when we implemented a waste ban on businesses and institutions that dispose of 1 ton or more per week of food material, about 2,000 entities. So that's the largest generators, and as we rolled out that waste ban, we took a really comprehensive approach. We delivered technical assistance through the Recycling Works program. We delivered education and outreach. We delivered market development assistance through grant and loan programs. So now we're still focused on those generators, but we're also shifting our focus more to focus on what we think of as the medium generators. So less than 1 ton per week of food waste, but greater than 1/2 ton per week of food waste. And we estimate roughly another 2,000 entities that fall into that medium category. And that's where we implemented a reduced food waste ban threshold in November of 2022, went from 1 ton down to 1/2 ton per week. And we've been supporting that again, continue support through Recycling Works assistance. We continue support through grant and loan programs, and we've also shifted our grant and loan programs so that now we also provide grants for collection of food material to help boost the collection infrastructure, realizing that as we get smaller and smaller with the sources, we need a more and more robust collection infrastructure, because ultimately we're going to have to collect not from like 2,000 sources or not from 4,000 sources, but more from like hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of sources. So you need a little different collection infrastructure to be able to do that. So that's the small generators, less than 1/2 ton per week businesses, lots of small business food waste generators, and I don't know what our statewide population is, 6.8 million residents or something like that. So a lot of residents that we want to try to capture food waste from. So when we think about residential food waste, we think about a multi-pronged approach, and different programs are going to fit in different communities. It's absolutely not a one-size-fits-all approach. So different communities are going to want to do different things and should do different things. In some places that might be curbside collection, some places it might be subscription curbside collection. Drop-off programs, home composting is a great way to go if you have the space and the interest. That's what I do. Small-scale local composting programs, and then doing more with education around reducing food waste. There's great stats about the amount of food waste an average family of 4 wastes on an annual basis, and I can't remember the exact number. Heather, do you remember this one? It's like $2,000 a year or something like that. It's pretty awful. Like every average family of 4 wastes about $2,000 of food a year, or something in that neighborhood. So we collectively and individually waste a lot of food, and we need to be more mindful about that, not just as businesses, but as individuals. And then a possible ban. Lots of people want us to implement a complete food waste ban, and I am very cautious about doing that. As I mentioned, it's a completely different collection infrastructure. The economics of collecting food waste from small businesses and residents are completely different. The receiving infrastructure probably needs to be different. There's more concern about contamination. The cost dynamics are completely different compared to collecting from like grocery stores and colleges and universities. So it's going to take a lot of thought. There may be a ban there in the future, but if we're going to go the route of a ban, we're going to have a very different and much more extensive collection and receiving infrastructure to support that. So that's very much, in my mind, very much an open question. Okay, so waste bans, we've relied on waste bans for a lot of materials through the years. And they've become a really important tool for us. We've used waste bans going way back to 1990. And again, we kind of implement waste bans as part of a comprehensive approach. We do have aggressive waste reduction goals in Massachusetts. We feel they're aggressive statewide to achieve a 30% reduction in disposal tonnage by 2030 and a 90% reduction by 2050. And that's really important because we have very tight disposal capacity in Massachusetts, and we have very tight disposal capacity in New England and throughout the Northeast, and it's only going to get tighter. So everything we can do to divert waste from disposal is really critical in that infrastructure picture. And then we also realize there's opportunities to capture the value of these materials, food especially, an especially valuable material, and to foster local economic and job growth. So there are environmental reasons to do this. There are infrastructure and economic reasons to do it. There are business development reasons to do this work. So waste bans, again, go back to the early 1990s. We have a lot of materials that are banned from disposal in Massachusetts. We do these through regulation under our existing statutory authority. Key language in the regulations: no person shall dispose, transfer for disposal, or contract for disposal, or transport of the restricted material. And we take this to mean that we can implement the waste bans against generators of solid waste, and where appropriate, we can implement the waste bans against waste haulers that are disposing of materials that have been separated and should not be going for disposal. We always develop new waste bans over a period of several years. It's a minimum 2-year process, and often more like a 3 to 4 year process to develop a new waste ban. No new waste bans in process now, by the way, in case you're wondering, like, what's next? Nothing right now. We get plenty to do without a new waste ban. So we're going to stick with what we got. Our focus with waste ban compliance is compliance by larger generators, businesses, and institutions. We do not do waste ban enforcement against individuals, against residents. Our focus from an enforcement perspective is on compliance by large generators. And then when we do new waste bans, we always emphasize compliance assistance and outreach out of the gate. We do these inspections and we monitor compliance at solid waste facilities. So landfills, our few remaining landfills, our municipal waste to energy facilities, about 5 each of those, and then a bunch of solid waste transfer stations. So that's where we go out and do inspections. We don't inspect unloading docks at the point of generation. We observe loads. We just stand there, watch loads come in for hours at a time, document what we see. We take pictures when we see banned materials. We identify load information, and then we work back to identify the source of the load, take enforcement against the waste generator. Typically, about 90% of the time, about 10% of the time, we're doing enforcement against a waste hauler. Again, our focus is businesses, institutions, government agencies, and sometimes haulers, not individual residents, from an enforcement standpoint. That doesn't mean there's no relevance for waste bans to residents, but we're not going to do enforcement against individual residents.